That's about hardwares we saw earlier. Now we're going to see what an OS is. OS, like we discussed earlier, it's a high level software. Now, softwares like VLC, Media Player, WhatsApp, Google Map all have a single purpose. But if you think of OS, it might just sound like taking an input, processing it, and then giving the output. But actually, there's so much involved because you have so many softwares being installed in a OS. How does the compatibility works? What standards a OS has to maintain so that other software developers can make softwares for that OS, and what security does that OS provides? All that is there. So when you look at it, these are the popular OS: the Windows, the Mac, Android, and Linux. Now this is highly used, but when it comes to OS, kernel is the most critical component. Kernel is through which all the softwares communicate to the processor. Software uses a kernel to process things and use memory and write disk and communicate with devices. So kernel is that key component. And we also brought something called drivers. Now, if you are from like a decade back, you might have seen this CDs that you install. Now what happens is, in earlier days, you need these drivers. Okay, let's say you develop a hardware. Now your hardware does something, like say a 3D printer. Now if you connect that hardware to your computer, how will your OS understand what hardware is that? So you have to develop a driver. Driver is basically like a translator. So you have to develop a driver. So that's how printers, they've all comes with a driver. They all come with a driver, and those driver has to be installed so that the machine, the OS, can actually understand the printer. Now that is the key purpose of a driver. And if you are thinking that there's no driver these days, yes, you have driver these days. Even these days you don't have CDs, but you download your drivers and you install it. If you buy new hardwares, you always have to install drivers so that the OS can understand. So that's what drivers are. Now, this is what typically the OS does. Process management, like there is just not one process. Like even if you think of Chrome opened in multiple tabs, it is just not one process. It is within Chrome itself, there will be multiple process. So there is process and dozens of process involved. So how it handles, manages process, all that is there. Then a command interpreter, like say a device will actually send a command, a software application will send a command. How does it interpret that? Security management, how does it secures the data? That's actually a tedious thing for an OS. And then files management, how files are managed. And then network management, how it communicates to the network and how the IO devices are managed, the input devices are managed, how it communicates with the input device. So there is a lot that's been handled by OS.